Welcome to Defense Tires. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and it is Wednesday, the 31st of July. I am down in Lafayette, Indiana. Been attending the hearings, as you guys know, over in Carroll County. Today was a very, very long day. Very, very long day. We had a couple hearings. It was really supposed to be two motions to suppress. As you guys know from yesterday's live, we had three motions that were heard. I got through two of them on the live, and then I had to jet because I had to do court TV. And I want to go over briefly what went down with that motion to dismiss, just kind of give you guys a primer before we dig into what happened here on day two. I'm sure some of you guys are hearing the buzz. They put on a witness late today, last witness of the day, who got the whole crowd all worked up. And it was interesting. It was pretty interesting. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about what went down with the motion to dismiss. I'm just going to give you, I'm not going to go through all the notes, note by note, but I am going to really kind of give you kind of the overarching theme. Essentially, the motion to dismiss is really kind of based on the fact that the defense is of the mindset that the state has withheld information and or intentionally destroyed information that could have been helpful to the defense and or exculpatory. And it's a challenging argument for the defense because one thing that's never going to happen is you're never going to get a cop up there or any law enforcement for that matter that's going to admit that they destroyed evidence intentionally. You're certainly not going to get any admissions from a prosecutor's office that's going to admit that they destroyed evidence intentionally or directed somebody to destroy it. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So, I mean, in terms of trying to win a motion like that, you have to try to do what Andrew Baldwin tried to do yesterday, which was establish kind of a factual scenario that if you look at it with intellectual honesty, that you can't come to any other conclusion other than it appears that they disappeared some evidence in the case regarding Brad Holder specifically. Like he was really kind of the focal point. A couple of the other third-party culprits were brought up, but Brad Holder was certainly the main topic of discussion. Several witnesses were put on the stand. And it was an interesting day. And I'll flat out say it. There's no chance in hell that Gull is dismissing the case. So let's just get that out there immediately because that is not happening. But like defense attorneys, we know. We go in knowing that the likelihood of winning these motions is typically slim and none, unless you've got some just smoking gun evidence that just blows the judge's hair back. And look, in this particular situation, I certainly think that there was powerful evidence in the way that Baldwin kind of went about doing it was essentially trying to introduce the fact that there were multiple interviews with Holder, yet none of them were ever recorded. There's questions about whether or not one of them actually took place. We know that the first interview on the 17th fell into the mysteriously deleted AV from the first few days of the investigation, those critical first few days. And, we're talking about this interview of Holder on the 17th. But but Baldwin didn't really even focus on that as much as this concept of the phone extraction, or the lack of a phone extraction, really is what it boiled down to. What he did was interesting in terms of kind of demonstrative evidence. He had, I think he's a young lawyer with the firm. He might be a clerk. I'm not sure. I haven't met him yet. But he had him drag a crate and drop like three huge piles of documents, probably a foot tall, on the counsel table right in front. And as he was starting to make the argument, he explained to the judge, look, Your Honor, these documents, I brought them here just to demonstrate so you can see with your own eyes, so you can visualize in your mind what a phone extraction looks like, what a full phone extraction dump looks like. And we know, based on the information provided yesterday, that law enforcement had done 101 phone extractions from all kinds of folks, people that were irrelevant, didn't matter. And it's just, one of those things where they're getting everybody's phone and they're extracting all the information. They're trying to find leads. They're trying to, do all kinds of things that could possibly lead to a suspect, including digging through as many phones as they can. And, including Holder's son, Logan's phone, which they searched and extracted. Yet they're claiming that they never extracted Brad Holder's phone. So when you kind of look at all of the evidence that existed, and Baldwin spent a long time going through a lot of the evidence that we've seen with regards to their filings that have to do with Brad Holder. So obviously the Facebook posts, which are certainly make you scratch your head. They certainly indicate that the guy's an Odin dude, and that, the timing of some of his posts are very curious. What he has in the posts are very curious in that they seem to match the crime scene photos. And he had those out yesterday. They did not broadcast them to the gallery, obviously. He had paper copies of them. And I think that they had one on a cork board that was not facing the gallery. I think only the judge and maybe the state's table could see it. And he had a paper copy, which he handed to Luttrell. And, but he was trying to stand in front of the gallery when Luttrell was looking at it to try to shield what it was. So I'm blind anyway. Even if I wanted to see it, I wouldn't have been able to see it. But he mentioned the fact that he was trying to shield the gallery from being able to see what he was looking at. But at any rate, it was a side-by-side. And it was, I believe, one of the crime scene photos of Abby in the condition she was found. And then he had the post of Brad Holder's, which seemed to be pretty close in mimicking the position that Abby was found. With the inference being, is this a coincidence? It seems strange that it's a coincidence. It seems like this is a guy you might want to look into. So he goes through a series of putting a bunch of Holder's Facebook posts into evidence, all to kind of build up this kind of momentum, in the sense that, like, this is a guy that, if you're being intellectually honest, you can't think that law enforcement would not have looked very, very hard at. And, there was an email from, I think it was Holman, and I'm not going to read all these, so don't quote me on anything. When I get to the second motion, I'll read my notes, but I don't want to be sitting here reading my pad all night. But it was an email from law enforcement. I'll just leave it at that. Basically saying that Holder is a guy that they're going to look at hard. And he ends up getting cleared pretty quickly in the case. In terms of how they decided to clear him, I'm not sure. It sounds like, I mean, it came into testimony that one of the things that they were looking at in terms of clearing him was his time card. Over at the landfill that he worked at, he got into work very early in the morning. I think he checked in at 4:55 a.m. or something around that time. Checked out or clocked out for lunch at like 12:22. Clocked back in at 12:42, and then ultimately left for the day around 2:35. And this came into evidence through Jerry Holman when they put him on the stand. Luttrell called him, I believe, or it might have even been Andy, but whatever the case may be, today was such a long day, it kind of blurred out everything that happened yesterday. It's a very, very long day. So ultimately, they testify at that point that their timeline, as far as they see it, the way the state has their timeline set up, is that the girls met their demise between 2:30 and 3:30. That's their timeline. They locked it in on the stand yesterday. And as far as they're concerned, they put in testimony that it's a 35-minute drive from the landfill to the High Bridge. And he's getting off work at 2:35. They've got this hour period in which they say that they think that the girls were killed. And ultimately, in their minds, Brad Holder couldn't have done it because he was at work, and then he goes to his gym a little after 4 and uses his fob. So they have these time frames from Brad Holder that are locked in. So, I guess in the minds of law enforcement, at least Unified Command, they just absolutely felt that this guy's cleared. Like, this isn't the guy. So they move on from him. So after that, Baldwin puts Murphy on the stand of Ferenczi, Murphy, and Click. Longtime cop. And I've been saying this forever. My thing with like the whole crowd that's like, oh, the Odin shit's crazy. The Franks thing is nuts. Like, I mean, those are 3 legit cops. Like I'm going to hear out legit cops always, especially if they have an opposing opinion from other cops in a case. I mean, it seems silly to just decide randomly that you're going to disregard one set of cops for another just based on the fact that the one set who happened to be running shit made an arrest. That doesn't exclude the work of 3 very qualified law enforcement officers. All of them, all 3 of them were, I mean, Murphy's dude's been doing it a long time, man, and like he testifies and he's a legit dude, he's law enforcement through and through, and he's sitting in a room with a bunch of cops who are not loving the fact that he's testifying and basically trying to flamethrow their case against Allen, So, I mean, you can imagine how difficult that must be for cops getting in, into a courtroom and getting on the stand and doing that. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's a small community in terms of law enforcement, especially, around Indiana. I think he's working up in Beverly Shores now as a parole officer, so maybe he doesn't care. But, he got on the stand and he gave a lot of testimony that certainly, and Baldwin asked the question, was Holder a suspect? And he said, depending on who you ask, if you ask one circle, no. If you ask another circle, yes. So the Click, Ferenczi, and Murphy circle definitely thought and still think that Holder is a suspect. And as we know, Unified Command does not. So Murphy's on there for a long time. They get into this interesting story about when Baldwin was deposing Murphy. And right before he was deposing Murphy, he was deposing Holman. And like I think he had Jerry in there for quite a while. And the way that he tells the story is that Andy had heard a ruckus out there. So like he talked to Murphy after the fact, and Murphy tells him, yeah, he's like, I ran into Jerry out in the hall, and Jerry had just gotten out of a long dup, and Jerry was pissed. And, you know, Jerry, like he said, he went in to give Jerry like a, you know, a bro hug. And Jerry's like, nah. He's like, you know, he asks him, what the fuck are these? How the fuck did they get these? Is what they said, or what Jerry says to him. And he's talking about these field notes that Murphy had created in his notebook that he was using to put his report together. And, you know, Murphy never really got clarification on who they is. You know, I guess that leaves it to our imaginations on who they could be. I tend to think that it's the defense. I mean, it could be the state, you know, because ultimately the state is who tendered the notes. You know, but ultimately, you know, we're at this point where, you know, you've got Holman super pissed off that these notes have made it over to the defense at this point, because obviously these notes were used in the deposition. So Holman's pissed about it. So Murphy's, you know, on the stand testifying for a long time. So ultimately, once Andrew's done kind of with his presentation and Luttrell puts on some evidence, I mean, ultimately the argument is this. The argument is that when you look at all of the signs, kind of the circumstantial evidence that seem to indicate that Brad Holder is somebody that should really be looked at hard, that is somebody that should probably move beyond just a person of interest and be a suspect. And you have to believe that his argument is essentially that if you're looking at the fact that they did 101 extractions and ultimately they don't extract Brad Holder's phone after they extracted everybody in their mother's phone, that he doesn't believe them. I mean, he like, without flat out saying it, he intimated it, but that it's that you have to just be completely blind to the fact that there's no way in hell that they didn't extract his phone, that he's insinuating that they did extract his phone and that they disappeared that extraction. I mean, that's what his argument is. And he used circumstantial evidence, because again, you're not going to be able to get a cop up there to admit that they destroyed evidence. They're just not going to do it ever. So, you know, my criticisms of the argument are that, like, in order to try to get Gall to buy it, because what they were able to do in order to counter that is put on the evidence of their timeline, the state's timeline. So they put on this 2:30 to 3:30 timeline, and it didn't go challenged. Like I was sitting in the gallery just thinking, man, like, he's got to attack the timeline. Like he's got to ask Holman, like, what did you form your opinion in terms of when the girls met their demise? Like what got you there? Is it just the phone usage? Is it an ME's report? What is it? How are you there? Because in my estimation, if the timeline is created post Allen arrest, well, that's awfully convenient, right? I mean, that's a timeline that's built out of convenience because that's when they know that Allen's there. Like that's not how this thing works. You don't make the timeline fit your evidence. You have to have the evidence fit the actual timeline. So I think like Baldwin really needed to be able to get the judge to understand that this timeline is a theory and we don't even know what it's based on. And how can you clear somebody in terms of them being at work during the day when you don't really know when the girls were killed? Like that, to me, to get Gull to even contemplate this thing, you had to get her off of that timeline. And it didn't come up. And remember, Gull doesn't have all the discovery. She's not sitting there reading through the discovery like the lawyers do. Judges, the only evidence they see prior to trial is evidence that's being litigated. So they don't have the same discovery files that the lawyers do. They have no idea what the evidence is until trial, or like I said, when they're litigating what's coming in, what's not coming in. So she's not going to have any idea that the defense is going to be challenging the timeline or that they can challenge the timeline. So in her mind, the way that she hears it yesterday through the evidence, it sounds like, well, they cleared Holder. They've got a timeline of 2:30 to 3:30 as to the time of death. And this guy was working 35 minutes away and then was at a gym by 4 something early, 4:05 or something like that, So it's just without attacking the timeline, that's, like I said in the beginning, that she's certainly not going to grant that motion. I think that a lot of this was, again, Andy trying to get the evidence from the Franks hearing in front of her, just in the event that she hasn't read through all of it. He's always desperately trying to get her to look at this other evidence. And obviously that's what tomorrow's going to be. Tomorrow's the big day. Tomorrow's really the day that I really wanted to make my way down here for. And that's the third party culprit stuff. So that was kind of the motion to dismiss in a nutshell. It was interesting. But it was, ultimately, I don't know that I have very low hopes that particular motion is going to succeed. So that moves us into day 2, which was today. I got out there probably about 6:45 a.m. and the thing went until 6:30, 6:35. It was a long ass day. And if you've never been to the Carroll County Courthouse, it's a beautiful old courthouse. I love it. But those seats in that courtroom are brutal. Sitting in those chairs for 8-9 hours is brutal. I mean, they're old school. They feel like old church pews. If you can imagine back in the day when it was just straight flat wood. It's painful. It's painful. It was I wanted to dip out so early, when it got past 5 o'clock, because the word on the street was that today's hearing was going to end early. And I was real excited. I'm it's wow, we'll be off at 3. I can go maybe take a nap because I'm exhausted, and then that was because they were talking about, we'll start the motion, the day 3 motions a little bit early, because Baldwin's always afraid that he's not going to have time and he's going to be cut off time wise. But I mean, frankly, Judge Gull, I have to say, has had the patience of a saint the past 2 days. I mean, she sat there all day and just let the lawyers do their thing, and was very pleasant the whole day. She was it was an impressive, because I'm sitting there as a lawyer thinking, oh my God, this thing is brutal. And I just know how much work Rosie put into that thing. I mean, that putting together a hearing like that in terms of the amount of evidence that he's trying to get in front of her with that amount of witnesses. And you know, they were big witnesses. You have Gallipo, the former warden of Westville. He testified. We had Monica Walla. She testified, who was the psychologist over at Westville, still is. And we had, well, I'll just go through it. So ultimately, and it's an interesting argument, because typically when you file a motion to suppress, and before I even get to that, there were two motions to suppress that were filed originally. And one of them was kind of a catch-all, like a motion just saying we're looking to exclude all of his statements, all of his confessions, because of the fact that we believe that everything that has happened since he's been in Westville when he was making these confessions was coercive, that the environmental factors of being in solitary 23 hours a day for months just had the effect of wearing him down. It was essentially, you know, that they were psychologically torturing him by depriving him of everything that he's known in the 48 years he was out of custody, in terms of just human contact, in terms of everything, you know, to be put into that like almost immediately after arrest is shocking to the conscience for anybody, you know. I mean, it's psychologically, it's very difficult to try to wrap your mind around that. And so the argument is essentially with that one, that it's a kind of a global, we're trying to kick all of them. Now, a typical motion to suppress is like the second one they filed, which, if you guys will recall, that one actually talked about the statement that they were seeking to suppress. And that was the statement that Alan had given to somebody regarding him killing the girls, but he says that he shot them in the back and that they were sexually molested. Both two facts which we know not to be true. So those things are, you know, that was like, you go in thinking that one is all right, that's a possible winner. But to my surprise, when he got in, the first thing he said is that they were withdrawing that motion. So they withdrew the one that had the specific, more kind of traditional motion to suppress, where you're giving a specific statement and then you're attacking it, saying they didn't give him Miranda rights, or he had lawyered up. You know, they had him in custody too long. You know, the interrogation was overbearing, and, you know, it went too long. Whatever the case may be, whatever the different ways we attack statements made by our defendants, like that motion was kicked to the curb. I really don't know why. I was sitting there trying to think of why they may have done it. And I think ultimately the thought might have been that it worked against the bigger motion, to have that motion being litigated to where you're trying to cherry pick one statement out may have hurt the overall theme, and which is a very challenging legal argument for the defense to get Gull to buy into, because it's a tough argument. And so that he kicks the second one, and then Diener was handling the argument for the state. She did a good job. You know, I thought they were both they both put a lot of effort into the motion. You know, it was a full day motion. Like, and I know for lay people, you know, just kind of looking at some of the crowd, and it was a lot of the usual suspects. It's like, it was a long day for people in the gallery who were just kind of like hearing this motion and wondering, you know, what are they talking about? Like, what does this have to do with the case? Like, what is all this shit? You know, it's like it was a nuanced argument, and it was a tough one. So before they start, Diener had filed a motion to dismiss that motion to suppress, and she was basically stating that, look, the reality is that they filed a motion that, number one, doesn't pinpoint any statements at all. It's just kind of a global motion, and that ultimately she didn't understand how, because Brad was talking about buckets. He's like, I'm going to talk about the way I'm going to try to break this down so it's more palatable is that there's statements that were made by Alan to Monica Walla. There's statements that were made by Alan to Kathy and to his mother over the phone. There's a written letter to Gallipo, the warden. There are statements that were made to the I forget what they call them, suicide. Let me look it up. It's the inmates that they use. I can't believe I can't remember. I heard it so many times today. It's been a long day, y'all. It's been a long day. Oh yeah, so the suicide companions, which are inmates that are felons, that are, which we actually found out they're paid to do it, that they stand out, or they get time knocked off their sentence if they do it, which is the equivalent to being paid. They stand outside the cell. So there's several of them that have written these log sheets, taking down what Rick is saying through this crack, and then guards. So he's like, I'm going to put them all in buckets. And, the family bucket, that was one where Diener's like, look, I don't know how you're considering Richard Allen calling his wife and his mother to be the equivalent of a custodial interrogation. And because it's not. And like, who's the state actor in that situation? Like who's the bad guy? Who's the state actor that's doing the things that's forcing Allen to make these statements? So, and she's like, there's simply no case law out there for this theory of the environmental factors, again, being the fact that he's in solitary, has been for months, clearly is not right in terms of the things he's doing, eating his own feces, running and smashing his head into a wall on repeat, all the things that are going on with him. To get that to a point where that itself, that form of kind of psychological torture, is the custodial interrogation. It's the equivalent of it, even though no one's like specifically doing anything. So ultimately, Gull says, all right, like, I'm going to take your motion under advisement. So she tabled it and she let Brad go with his motion. So he calls Gallipo first, and like his testimony was lengthy, and it was basically the equivalent to the exact testimony that he gave back in June about the first time that Mistress, I'll get there. The first time he put him on, and it was basically to establish the conditions at the prison, and Gallipo's thing is like, look, he's being treated the same or better than the other 255 guys that are in this kind of prison within a prison, which is what it is. Like this area that he's in, this confinement area, like they put dudes in there like suicide watch, or hyper violent guys, or people that they've had issues with, or people that like with contraband or trafficking drugs. That's where they store all these guys. So that's where Allen's at. But Allen's in one of the 4 cells that has a camera on in the cell 24/7. And the staff was put on notice that every time that they move him anywhere in the prison that he's to be filmed, which he was. And he's the only guy that they're doing that with. Like, they're not doing that with anybody else. And like the thing that Gallipo is refusing to acknowledge is that those dudes are all felons, convicted felons. Richard Allen's a pretrial detainee. And I don't care where you're at in terms of innocence or guilt. Again, like, we're not there yet. Like, we're talking about a guy who is awaiting trial, who's being held in a prison in just completely prison-like circumstances. It's like, it's different. It's like, you can't just say, okay, well, tough shit, he's a convicted child killer, he deserves every bit of it. Well, if he's convicted, then sure, that's fine to say. But like, when you're awaiting trial, that's not how it's supposed to be, and it's like this guy, and it all harkens back to the safekeeping order that was put into place by Judge Diener without any due process to Rick Allen. He wasn't even put on notice that they were going to be moving him. He wasn't appointed counsel. This happened before I think Allen even had a lawyer appointed to him. They decided that they were going to move him, because Tony Liggett's like, I can't have him in Carroll County. Like, I'm legitimately concerned that somebody's going to kill him. So, they ended up moving him. And once that safekeeping order is in place, it trumps everything. Like, that's what became apparent throughout this hearing, is that, and it really became really apparent when Dr. Walla was on the stand, who I really liked. Like, I thought that she's a credit to her profession. Like, she's got a really tough gig in terms of who she's trying to help in the prison system. And I'm a big advocate for, inmates and people that have been charged and convicted of crimes, if they're suffering from mental health issues, that it be dealt with. That they're just not thrown in a cage and forgotten about. So I really respect what she does. And when I get to her, I mean, she owned her shit. Like, like Brad kind of, like, I guess I'd call it, like, gently threw her under the bus, about everything that was going on with her and socials and her being on Facebook. And I think she was in our group, our insiders group on Facebook. I don't know that she made any comments on there, but she was definitely in there. And I mean, he put it to her gently, and like kind of saying, look, you were following well, I don't want to jump ahead. So ultimately, I'll get to her though. She was a really interesting witness. So ultimately, Gallipo just kind of Brad goes through all the conditions of confinement again, is trying to dig into whether or not, Gallipo was looking at these log sheets, which are the things written out by the inmates, the suicide companions, or the guards. Because at some point, they didn't like what was going on with the suicide companions, the inmates, because it got loose that a couple of them, like one of them made a YouTube video somehow, talking about, hey, we got this guy in the jail. And like, they were spreading the word that Allen was in jail. And I think that there was an allegation that maybe one of them said something that Allen had said or repeated it to a family member, but no one could confirm it. But at any point, or at some point in time, they decided to quit having the companions outside of Allen's cell, and they just started having the guards do it instead. So they were guard companions doing the same thing. Like, their job is to sit out there and they're taking notes, as to everything that Allen's muttering through the door. Like, these aren't situations where you have like your typical custodial interrogation. I mean, clearly he's in custody, so that prong is taken care of. The question is like, where does the interrogation side of it come in by a state actor? Like, that's what you need. And, it's like the state was making a point to ask everybody, well, you never asked Rick Allen, like any questions about his case, right? Especially to like Walla, like when she's up there, like when Diener crossed her she went at her pretty hard about the fact that like she never asked Rick Allen. Like when Rick Allen would blurt shit out, it wasn't at the behest of her asking a question about the case. And the same thing with the guards. That they're all claiming that Allen was just puking this stuff up. So, so Gallipo is like, the first witness, and at that point, I think Gull asks a question, and she may have asked this question prior to, based on Diener's motion to dismiss, and like Gull wanted to know how the statements of the family fall under actions as a state actor, like where, like how am I getting there? And basically Brad's response was like, well, the state actor is the fact that they put Richard Allen in a hole for 7 months before he made a statement. Like he was in for months before he started spewing all this shit. And the question like arose, is it a weight? Like, do we give a weight versus admissibility? Is it a weight issue, meaning is it going to be litigated at trial and the jury is going to have to give it the weight? These statements are going to have to give it the weight that they deserve or don't deserve? Or is it an issue of, should I make them inadmissible or not? So like that was that's the question she's ultimately going to be battling with. So, the other issue with this is voluntariness, or these voluntary statements by Rick Allen, and certainly the fact that he was in that mental state due to the fact that he's in solitary 23 hours a day, and he's, there was some debate on whether or not the lights were on in his cell all the time. Gallipo testified that you can dim them. Only Richard Allen can dim them. It's noisy as hell in there, so he can't sleep. Can't sleep because of the noise. Can't sleep because of the lights. He's alone 23 hours a day. He gets 3 hours of rec. Gallipo said it was like somewhere between 3 and 5. He wasn't sure. But it was just like this all of this stuff going on with him. In the estimation of the defense, is that, anything that he was saying wasn't voluntary because he wasn't of sound mind. He had lost his mind. He was psychotic during this period of time from basically April through like the end of June, like is when he made all these statements. 61, the state has stated that he's made 61 what they consider to be direct confessions. Like it's a lot of me. I think a majority of them are generic. I killed the girls. I did it. I killed the girls. But when I get to Harshman, who was the state's final witness that they put on, and kind of in defense of the motion, he's the guy everybody's talking about. Like it was kind of a big deal with that guy. I could only, like, when I was sitting there, I was like, oh boy, like the interwebs are going to be on fire tonight. So Brad, after he calls Gallipo, gets kind of all the conditions of the prison, trying to build the scene in Gull's mind to exactly, what the hell is going on. And Gallipo testified a little bit to the fact that Allen had been tased once or twice. It's not clear whether or not he was tased. He was definitely tased once because he wouldn't take his hands out of the little cuff port, like where they slide food through in the door. Like they make him stick his hands through there so they can take his cuffs on so they can shut the door real quick. And he wouldn't put his hands in there, so they tased him. And I guess there was a second occurrence of that It wasn't clear whether or not they tased him a second time. Um, and, Gallipo claims that, he was personally aware that there were 3 to 5 different statements made by Allen through the cell door in the presence of others, either a prisoner, one of the inmates, or a guard, where, he was saying, I killed Abby and Libby with no details. So just like general confessions. And, so Brad asks him, he's like, look, this was very much a continuing investigation into Allen. And Gallipo says, well, yeah, meaning like essentially what they're doing is they're using the phone system, which obviously everything's recorded. Anybody that knows anything about jails and prison, it's the first thing Allison and I tell everybody with respect to clients. I'm like, you don't talk on the jail phone. Everything's recorded. You don't text or talk about your case on your tablet because it's all recorded. Everything's kept. Everything's monitored. All of it. It's afraid. Like we tell everybody that. Like we tell the family members. We tell our clients. I'm like, if you talk about your case on the jail phone or on your tablets, or if you're emailing them from a prison computer, whatever the case may be, they're seeing it. So just keep that in mind and don't do it. And I guarantee that Brad and Andy told Rick the same shit. And I'm sure that they told Kathy and Rick's mom the same shit, that you don't talk on the phone. Which just, again, when you're thinking about these confessions in his state of mind, it's interesting. And it gets even more interesting with Harshman, the cop, the Indiana State Trooper. So after he calls, so he put Gallipo on the stand, and then he called somebody from Internal Affairs, the DOC Internal Affairs officer, investigator, Miss Maps, and she was up there, and she's law enforcement, and she's basically testifying as to kind of like what happens with these log sheets that are prepared by the inmates and the guards. Okay, so whenever Allen would make a statement, all the inmates that were outside the prison door of his cell and the guards would write down everything that he said. And then they'd turn them in. And Gallipo would testify that he never sees any of these things, that these things are just, they're put into a box. At some point, they were put into a locked box because he didn't want people to be able to access them. And then they get sent to the central office, whatever that means. It's a super big brother sounding phrase there, the old central office. They get sent to the central office. And at that point, you've got a situation where Allen makes a statement against interest. Dude writes it down. It gets stuck in this box. It gets sent to the central office, and then it gets sent typically to IA, to like this Miss Maps. There was also one interesting thing that came up about the legal mail that he said that that they open legal mail and they make copies of it. And they started doing that because they started finding out that like a lot of people were just saying it was legal mail, but they were really trying to send weed into the prison for them to smoke. So in response to that, they started opening it all, claiming they don't read it, making a copy of it, and just making sure there's no contraband in there, which is shocking to me. It's shocking. Like, as a defense attorney, it's disgusting. Like, to know that, I mean, like, do I believe for one second they're not reading through like especially on a case that's of interest. I mean, if it's just some dude, probably not. But like, you don't think they're taking a peek at shit that Andy or Brad's selling, like sending Rick Allen? I don't know. All right. So once Maps gets like once she gets the documentation, and she wasn't on the stand for very long. They were just trying to kind of get an idea of what her role is in this. And like essentially, like she investigates the wrongdoings of the staff, of visitors, like she's an IA, internal affairs. And at some point, Mullins, who was a cop for, working for the prosecutor's office, reached out to her and claimed that he was going to be coming to interview Richard Allen, which was strange. Like he's like Allen is represented. Like no law enforcement officer should be interviewing Richard Allen without his attorneys present ever. That's a big no-no. But it sounds like that didn't happen anyway. And like he asked her questions if she was aware of Norse paganism, of Odinism. She said yes. That one of her primary roles is that, she looks into offenders to find out what their gang affiliations are, because obviously inmates, still are very much active within their gangs as prisoners in there. But, she also asked if she was aware if any of the staff members were Odinists, and she said that that she had heard about the patch thing, and that they were aware of it, and I think that was what caused the patches to be removed ultimately. And ultimately, at some point, like Brad asked her about like what encourages inmates, because he was trying to figure out like why these particular inmates, and I'm talking about Rosie, was trying to figure out why these particular inmates were selected as the suicide companions. And she didn't really have an answer. She said like, that it wasn't her that selected them, that people volunteer it because there's a time cut. It cuts time off your sentence. So, and it's all people from that same, like, kind of the same area in the prison. And it's kind of supposed to be religious based. It's supposed to be, they're supposed to be supportive people that are trying to, help people that are suicidal through rough patches. So that's kind of what the concept was behind it. I think it was probably bastardized with Allen. So he's done with her. So he's now kind of built like the situation in terms of the environmental factors that Allen's living within. He's got kind of somebody to come in and explain what these log sheets are and where they go and what they do with them and where they end up. And then ultimately, after lunch, Holman is called to the stand, and talking about Lieutenant Jerry Holman, Indiana State Police. And, he's basically, and he's called by Rosie. So he asks him that once they became aware of Allen making statements against interest, that became an active part of the investigation. Now, I tell you all the time, like when we're talking about any case, that the investigation when somebody's arrested is not over. Far from it. Many times they get more evidence post-arrest than they do prior to. It's very much alive and it's very much going on. And when these statements started becoming a thing, that became a huge area of investigation for them. So, and Holman kind of goes through like who was assigned to this task of dealing with, because it's not just the the recorded phone statements. It's everything that was in writing. It's all the video, whether it be from the cell, they're watching all the video from the cell. They're watching all the video from him being transported to medical. They're watching the video from him being transported anywhere. Like, they're filming him at all times. So they're watching all of it, trying to see if he does or says something that is against his interest. They also, so he's got Vito Mullins and Rich Davies working on it, as well as the last witness, who was, I can't remember, Harshman, Brian Harshman. And when I get to him, you guys are gonna be like, "Oh shit, this guy." So those are the four dudes who are all kind of working actively on trying to put together Rick's statements. So they're subpoenaing records, they're reviewing all the video, and at that point, they know that he's confessed to his wife and to inmates, to his mother, to doctors. And after they kind of gather the phone records, that's when they start subpoenaing all the other stuff. So, like, first they hear the phone confessions. At that point, that's when they start subpoenaing the log sheets. Okay. And when those start coming in, they see that he's making statements to these guys too, as well as the guards. But ultimately, it turns out that Harshman is the main dude. Like, he kind of falls into the role as the primary eavesdropper. He's the guy who's spending huge amounts of time listening to every single call. And when he testifies, he states that Allen's got 100, maybe 150 plus hours of phone time. So it's a shit ton of listening, and he's listening to all of it so he can pick out things that Allen's saying that are of interest, or against his own interest. And again, going through all the video. So he's trying to keep up with that as that moves along. Ultimately, and again, it includes the letter to the warden, and at some point, Brad asked Holman if he was listening to any calls. He's like, no. He's like, when something pops up, like if they get some sound that I need to hear, they'll send it to me. I'm not digging through the stuff myself. I've got other guys doing it. So, and I'm sitting there the entire time. Like, I think all of us are. Like Allison and I keep saying, it's like I need to hear the statements. I need to hear what he's saying. I need to know the context before we know if they're damning. Like is it just a dude who's become unhinged because he's in solitary for 7 months, or is he giving information that only the killer would know? That's much weightier, right? If he's giving information that there's only one way to know it, and that's if you were at the scene, that's problematic for Rick Allen. That would seem to be a pretty big indication of guilt. So I'm just sitting there waiting, and then Holman talks about, and I think, I can't remember where I heard this, but that he claims that this was kind of the first nibble of the actual content of one of the statements. And he says that that Allen made a statement that he had used a box cutter to commit the crimes. And so Holman himself went to CVS, talked to somebody there to verify whether or not they issue box cutters, which he stated that they did. So he tried to verify that thing a little bit. so that was like kind of the first taste of an actual statement, which had been floating out there. I'd heard the box cutter thing somewhere. I don't know where. Rosie then asked him if he ever interviewed Kathy and Alan's daughter. He said he did, but it was early, which we knew about. Both of them were interviewed, I think, pre-arrest, like right before he was arrested. And ultimately, he kind of finishes it with him. Didn't really get into any specifics again as to any of these statements. So, like at this point, we're after lunch. We're like 5 hours into this thing, and I'm like, man, where are the statements? I went into this hearing thinking I'm going to hear either the audio or we're going to see some of the written statements or we're going to hear them reading them, and I'm just like not getting it. So then they call Dr. Wallow, who's the lead psychologist out at Westville, and she was assigned to treat Alan. She'd been working out at Westville since 2017. And like her job is to deal with private matters, personal matters, health issues. That's what her scope of her job is in terms of dealing with inmates, not just Alan, but all inmates. And then so they start trying to get like, and ultimately the timeline of what happened in DOC is going to be a big deal. And you'll see why it's going to be a big deal because of the testimony from Harshman today. Like in terms of when things happened is going to make a big difference at trial as to the reliability of whether or not these are authentic confessions or whether or not they were the ramblings of a madman. And like being able to put together like the little pieces, like a big piece is going to be when Alan gets the discovery from his lawyers. Like there's talk that happened on April 3rd or 4th. I think it might have been the 4th, but it could be the 3rd that Alan got the discovery, and that in their minds, that's when he gets that discovery, that's when this shit all starts with him acting psychotic, like where he's off. And, you always have this question with psychologists. They even asked Harshman at the end, like Diener was trying to ask him, what the guards thought, whether or not Rick Allen was faking that he's crazy. Like, and no one was using the word malingering. They were using like feigning. It's weird. Like the kind of, like the term is malingering. I was surprised that Wallow was using feigning. She had written it in her report. But at any rate, so she's kind of like talking about the kind of the volume of her visits with him. She said like kind of initially, like because he was having a very difficult time acclimating himself to being in custody, that she was talking to him daily for various amounts of times. A lot of times it's outside of his cell door, talking through a crack, just asking him how he's doing, asking him if he needs anything, just kind of checking in on him. But that was happening daily. And then, and she said that went on for about a month. And then, so that brings us probably into like November, December. And then for the next few months up until like March, it was like once or twice a week she'd pop by, and it was like she could either be doing her rounds or Alan could request to speak with her. It's like one of those two things would take place, and that's when she'd show up. So ultimately, she ends up again after the shit hits the fan and he starts acting off, like with just doing and acting and saying strange things. Not even like the confessions, just she can tell he's not right. Like there's something going on with him mentally. And so it picks up back again to where it's like an everyday type of thing. And there were master's level therapists that would talk to him and bachelor's level therapists that would talk to him as well. So she has some people underneath her. She's not the only one running around trying to talk to everybody. But a majority of the discussions with Rick take place in his cell. There is another area where she can bring him, which again is like a really confined area where there's like a cage in between them, and like he's in the cage side of it, and then she's on the other side of it. So it's certainly not like a great area for, you know, trying to heal your mind if your mind is broken. You know, it's like you know, but it's prison. Like, what do you expect? So, which is kind of the point. Like it's all kind of the point that like prison isn't where this guy should be while he's waiting for trial, you know, and like they're treating him as if he is a convict, but he's not understanding that you know, like whatever accommodations they're having to make for him, like he broke his tablet and they had to get him a second one, even though he couldn't pay the fee. Well, you have to do that because his lawyer's 200 miles away, you know, and his lawyer, like this guy is supposed to be able to like prepare for trial somehow with his lawyers being a great distance away from him. So he starts kind of getting into like her first contact with Rick. And he's trying to kind of dig into the waiver issue because as a physician, and with him being a prisoner, you know, there is, of course, still confidentiality, doctor-patient confidentiality. And, you know, Brad was really trying to kind of dig into that side of it and find out, like, was she advising him of that? Did she advise him of the exceptions to confidentiality, which there are various ones, including the homicide exception? And the bottom line was that she had really never gotten into, like, she couldn't recall whether or not Rick had even signed a waiver. She had kind of assumed by the time that he had gotten her that he had already signed some kind of waiver. But like she wasn't confident on it, you know. So he was asking her, well, did you advise him? Did you tell him, you know, like what you're supposed to be talking about? He's asking her, like, you know, did you ever ask him about his case? And she was like, no, that's not what my role is. I'm not trying to talk to him about his case. So, you know, he then starts trying to probe into what her feelings were about the suicide companions, the inmates. She's not a fan. She was not a fan of them with respect to Rick Allen, because she had heard the story about one of them that, like, she told the story about like a YouTube. Like I didn't catch all the details, but she didn't give many details about how one of the inmates somehow got it on YouTube that Rick Allen was in jail with him or in prison with him. You know, and that there's like that just the prisoners in the area where he's at in the WCU are like screaming, kill yourself, baby killer, like all this shit that's going on. And it's like constant every time that he's walking around out in public, or not in public, but kind of in Gen Pop when he's walking through the prisons. So ultimately, like when she first gets to Rick, you know, she knows that he's had some heart issues medically and that he suffers from depression and that Brad was calling it major depressive disorder. She kind of was like, like I know he suffers from depression. She didn't seem to lean into the major depressive disorder, but I think ultimately she ended up doing it. And like, so this whole concept of what they call SMI, severe mental illness, becomes a major issue during this particular testimony. And it was really pretty interesting. Like a lot of Brad's argument kind of gelled here with respect to what was going on with Alan. And, like Brad called her or asked her, would you consider Alan to be kind of an eggshell inmate, meaning that he was fragile when he was admitted? And she said, yeah, sure, I would. And at some point, like when the shit's really bad, there's this, she's got this dichotomy that she's trying to deal with. She's got this safekeeping order that's in place that basically trumps anything that the DOC has in place in terms of regulations. Like one of the things that really stuck with me the most from her testimony was the fact that because there had been a lawsuit against IDOC, and it was essentially, them digging into situations where they're holding people in solitary for too long. And kind of the threshold is 30 days. Now, Alan has been in there for 9 months. So the threshold where they say psychologically you're moving into very dangerous waters if you keep somebody in solitary for more than 30 days. So, and again, Alan's been in there for 9 months at that point in time. So as you can imagine, that's a problem. Now, where the issue arises is that if he didn't have the safekeeping order in place, like Walla could have made a recommendation to get him to the psychiatric hospital, to get him out of the prison, but because the safekeeping order is in place, she had one lawyer sitting close to her, and there were 2 other people, I think, that were from the prison sitting in the back, 2 females. I don't know who they were. They never testified, but I knew that the one was her lawyer who was sitting kind of in the jury box while she was testifying. So she was limited in some of the things that she could say. Like she could not give the details as to, like, if she made a recommendation because of she felt that he had SMI, serious mental illness, which would allow for her to transfer him out to a mental hospital, mental facility, was trumped by like the powers that be. She's like, I don't know what went on in that meeting, but they came back and told me because the safekeeping orders, he's a safekeeper, and like that trumps the fact like he's not going anywhere. Not only is he not going anywhere, he's staying in the exact same cell that he's been in, and he's not going anywhere ever. So she's like, so her hands are tied, and Brad asked her the question flat out. He's like if you were just like clinically working with this guy and it wasn't as you're, in the role of as somebody working in a prison, like what would you have done with him? Would you have sent him to a mental, like based on your evaluations and your observations on him, like would you have sent him to a state mental facility? And she's like, yeah, I would have. She's like, but I couldn't. So like you've got this situation where like she sees what's going on with him and is obviously concerned and really has her hands tied, so at some point they start giving him the shots. And again, this is where I'm saying, like, in terms of the timeline, it's going to be critical to figure out exactly what went down. Like starting with when he gets the discovery to when he makes the first statement, when the statements start occurring, because what it appears to be is that all the confessions are made between April and the end of June, and then they end. Now, when I get to Harshman, he claims that he made some kind of statement when he's in Wabash, but it's not like a direct confession. It's like an inference to something. It's not like him saying I killed the girls, like he was doing for these 3 months. At the same time, he's eating his own feces. At the same time that he's literally running full speed, smashing his head into the wall on repeat, like over and over and over again, just smashing his head. Like it sounds insane. And it's all on video. It has to be on video because they were taping him all the time. So like in the shot is a tranquilizer. They're tranquilizing. So they start tranquilizing him. In terms of, she couldn't remember exactly when he got the first shot. But she stated that the shots are very rare. Like that those are not, like that's not the default. That is not like, oh, this dude's off, acting off the chain here. We're gonna give him the shot. It's like she testified it's very rare for them to resort to the shots. So like that tells you where he was at. And she kind of diagnosed him as like temporary psychosis is what she called it. And that he was having a psychotic reaction to the stress, that, he was depression at its peak, that he was almost vegetative, that at some point, like in May, like from May 18th through like into June, like it was progressively getting worse. Like from the 22nd of May, she said that he was having a psychotic reaction to the stress. May 27th, his depression was at its peak. He was vegetative. He wasn't speaking, wasn't doing anything, wasn't eating, that shortly after that, his knees are buckling. He's stuttering. He can't speak words, so it's like, finally, she says in July, like around July 11th, that like after he's had the shot, that she felt that his mental health was starting to get restored. But like after that, there was a weird occasion where his eyes were bulging out of his skull, and she didn't know what was causing that. And this is all in 23, leading up to the time that he gets shipped off to Wabash under cover of darkness in December. At some point, like she was pretty definitive, and it was like a kind of an awkward situation because she works in the prison, but she works for a company that's contracted by the prison. So like she was very honest. I really had a lot of respect for her. Like she went in there and was taking the beatings in terms of things that she should have done, in terms of things that she shouldn't have done. And Brad would kind of like got into this area of questions. In her mind, she said, he asked her, would you consider, like, and he was asking her under the DSM-4, which they're currently the DSM-5, but like, I think at the time, or that was pertinent to the point he was trying to make, it was still the DSM-4. He said, would you consider Alan to have an SMI? Did he meet the criteria? And she said there was no doubt that yes. But then again, because he was a safekeeper, that her hands were tied, that the SMI designation was meaningless because she couldn't do anything about it, that the fact that the safekeeping order was in place trumped it all. And then again, The one thing that I want you to take away from this is that the threshold in terms of how long the DOC themselves say that anybody should be kept in solitary, aside from extenuating circumstances like hyper violent dudes that have just like lost their shit and they cannot let out around anybody, like think Hannibal Lecter type shit. Like those are the dudes that you keep in there longer than 30 days. Otherwise, you shouldn't be in there. And that's just not been the experience for Alan. So he then kind of got into he like, and Diener objected. Like Diener was like, I don't know what any of this has to do with a suppression motion. Like where are we at here? Like, why are you talking about all this shit? Like, how is this relating to state actors? How is this relating to, like statements that need to be suppressed because of state actors acting in a nefarious type of way and they're extracting information from this guy? Like, where's it at? Like, where's the where's the at least the equivalent of a custodial interrogation? Like, I'm just not seeing it. So like Brad doesn't offer a proof, and he puts in, and I was wondering if Osbrook's probably in here. Put it in the chat, Michael, if you're in here. We were thinking that Osbrook might have been one of the guys that was a part of this suit, but there was a suit from the Southern District Federal Court, Southern District, and it was this lawsuit that was taking place between IPAS and IDOC that basically touched upon all the things that they were talking about with respect to things that were adopted by the IDOC in terms of how inmates are to be treated with respect to these issues. And, the fact of the matter is that Alan unequivocally was being treated in a manner that was not consistent with the guidelines. So ultimately, at some point, Brad starts going into other areas. He gets into this whole thing with Walla, that she had been following the case prior to it. It was a really strange kind of diversion from like talking about like the treatment and Alan's mental state and some of the statements that, and again, with Walla, there's no specificity as to what's said. Like, not really. Like we're still not hearing the statement. So it's like, as we go deeper and deeper into this hearing, it's becoming more and more evident that we're not going to hear any of the statements, which I've been waiting to hear since we heard about them. Which, I mean, we're just gonna have to wait till trial. That's evident. But so Brad starts kind of grilling her. I would consider it to be a light tossing under the bus of her, is because he's going at her that she was interested. She was listening to podcasts about Down the Hill before Rick Allen was her patient. That she was interested in Keegan Kline. That after Rick Allen was arrested, she was interested in Rick Allen, like before he got to her. And he's in, and she had made a post. I mean, she was in the Insiders, Defense Diaries Insiders, our Facebook group, like definitively, like when she kind of like became public, when the state put her on blast, that's when she dropped out all the groups. But she had posted, and it sounded like it was a recommendation of different podcasts that they could listen to. And it was somebody asking for a recommendation. So he's like, do you think that's ethical? Do you think that it's ethical for you to be listening to podcasts, about your patient, theoretically your patient? And she was like, yeah, I don't, she's like, it doesn't affect the way I treat my patients, which makes sense. She's like, I'm treating all convicted felons who I could go online and find out, and I read the criminal history. I know what they've done. Like, it doesn't, like, I'm not treating them any differently, which resonated with me. I don't think it would affect her, but it could. It's definitely not the best practice. Like, if she's listening to us, hopefully she's of the mindset, you got to wait till trial. If she's listening to other podcast, she's gonna potentially be on the torch and pitchfork crow, like, oh, he's convicted before we have trial. It's like, depends on what she's listening to, really, as to whether or not, I certainly wouldn't want her listening to podcasts that are, convicting people before trials, because that would certainly not be a good look for a doctor. Like, if she's thinking this guy's a murdering, psychopath and just an awful person, I would have to think that would somehow maybe potentially affect her subconsciously, even if she's not consciously doing anything, but maybe not. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't have to treat people from a clinical sense. So, I'm going to take her word for it. Cause like I said, I really respected her up there. So Brad keeps going into kind of the social media thing, and that she was in chats and, kind of digging into it. And then he keeps going at her, because one of the interesting things is that when she would take her notes based on her discussions with Alan, she would put them into the system, like the medical record system. And then she would shred her notes, her handwritten notes. And, Brad was like, well, aren't your notes going to be the best evidence? Like, how do we know? And like, kind of that argument went to the defense trying to block, I think, the state, or vice versa, from like, there's another motion that was kind of quasi argued in there about getting the medical records, where the state's trying to get Walla's records. And Rosie was saying, well, we don't have her records. Her records were destroyed by her. And Walla's like, well, nobody keeps the records. Like, no one wants to leave their notes hanging around on their desk, because we don't want random people to be able to pick them up. And he's like, well, don't you have a locked cabinet? She's like, no, I don't have a locked cabinet. She's like, it's kind of what everybody does. So he starts reading her kind of the code of conduct, going through point by point what the best practices are in terms of, keeping the notes. Should they be destroyed? Things like that. And so he kind of ends it in that vein with her. She was interesting. She was a very interesting witness. And I can see there's probably a pretty high likelihood that she will get called again at trial. I think, yeah. Do I sound slow, Nay? It's been a long day, y'all. Like, the fact that I'm on here, it's a miracle. Like, these trips are expensive and exhausting, both. Like, the hotels are $150 a night. It's like these are like, I put a lot into these things. So I hope you guys are appreciative and not being critical, because I'm being slow and a little tired. I'm doing the best I can. So let's see. So then we get into the cross of her, and Diener doesn't really go at her too hard. She kind of gets into, she tries to kind of say, all right, look, like, your notes are like literally everything that you have in quotations from your notes were typed into the system, right? Yeah. She's like, essentially all you're doing is taking your notes and typing them into the system. She's like, for the most part. So Diener tried to kind of like say, like, yeah, maybe the notes would have been the best, but this is the next best thing. So she then asks, like, what's important for Diener, because it could be argued certainly that Walla is a state actor. So like, that whole question about, waiver, explaining to Alan, that there's certain exceptions to the things that he can tell her, like Allison was like saying, oh, she should have been reading them as rights. And I'm like, probably, but like, she didn't. She's not a cop. But, and it sounds like he really never had a clear understanding. Like, she never like kind of broke it down for him. Like, if you tell me this, I'm gonna like I don't like, the privilege isn't gonna protect you from me disclosing it. But she wasn't like, so Diener asks her, all right, well, were you asking Alan anything specifically about his case ever? She's like, no, I wasn't. That's not what my job is. I never talk about the facts of the case. It's like anything that he said to me was spontaneous. Like he would just blurt things out. Or, for instance, there were a couple of occasions where he is trying to get Kathy on the phone and he's having a hard time. Yeah, Haldol's. Yeah, that was the thing. So, and she's trying to help him get Kathy on the phone. And so she dials the number, she doesn't answer. And then, there's another time when she does answer and like she gives him privacy. And then, when she comes back in, she says, how'd the conversation go? And he's like, oh, I needed to confess to her. I wanted to confess to her. And she says, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, but, she didn't believe me. So it's like, it was always stuff like that. Like, so it was always things like where he's making disclosures to her that were not made as as a result of answering a question that she asked him. So, so she didn't keep Walla on there too long. And then it got kind of interesting with Walla and Diener because she starts kind of going into some of the specific reports that Walla wrote about the times that Rick made some kind of statements against interest in her presence. And so this is kind of, again, where when we're trying to think about building the timeline of how this works. So again, like she testified on April 3rd or 4th. That's when Rick received the legal documents, which was some portion of the discovery. Now, we don't know what it was. I have no idea what it was. But like in the minds of the state actors, this is when they think, like in their version of the story, Rick going nuts coincides with the day he gets his discovery. And so that's kind of been their position. And so as she's reading through some of these reports, excuse me, as she's reading through some of these reports, she's like I start hearing the word feigning, like in some of these reports. I'm like, oh shit, like the medical terminology would be malingering, or the legal terminology would be malingering, faking. And she had written something in one of her reports after the legal visit on like April 4th, like asking that he said that he was presenting bizarrely. So this is like the day after or the day of that he gets his legal documents. And they're calling that a major event. And it's after this that he starts confessing to other staff. And that a lot of the quotes that she put in her reports were from the companion reports. So, I mean, I don't know how much I trust the companion reports at all. Like in terms of things that I trust on a scale of I don't trust it at all to I trust it almost infallibly. Like the inmate thing is probably down at like a scale of 1, with 10 being the highest. Like I just, I mean, like inmates are trying to get in good stead. They know what they're looking for. They know, like, cause like Brad trying to, he kept trying to get at that aspect of like, like, is somebody telling these dudes like what you're looking for? But nobody like in law enforcement is going to ever admit that that's what they're doing. That's what makes both of these motions, both Baldwin's motion to dismiss and Brad's motion here, is that they're having to kind of to put together a circumstantial case that these things are happening, because they're never going to get admissions from anybody on that prison staff or the cops. Like, nobody's ever going to admit, yeah, we were trying to extract confessions out of this guy. Duh. Like, did you see our PCA? Like, obviously we needed more evidence, and what's better than a confession? So we were torturing this guy psychologically for months until he cracked and started spilling. Now the question becomes, when he starts spilling, is he spilling the truth, or is he spilling shit that he's making up? Is he trying to placate them, trying to get himself out of there, trying to get into a mental hospital? Like, what's the angle? Like why? Like, it's like, that's the thing you have to ask yourself. Like what causes false confessions spontaneously? It's one thing to have custodial interrogations where people confess, where they're being grilled for 72 hours or longer, or whatever the case may be. They're just coming hard at a guy, and then they finally crack. It's a different situation when you have a psychological break and they start confessing. Like, is that shit that's been planted in his head by guards, by inmates? I mean, like, we'll never know. We'll never know. You'll never know the truth of that. But it's like, that's why you have to look at the context of the statements. That's why we have to look at the timeline of when things are going to make. And like, this thing's not going to get granted by Gull. Like, she's not going to keep the statements out. I'm sure the defense is preparing for that eventuality. And they're going to have to deal with this at trial. They're going to have to bring up all this shit at trial. This is going to be a whole, so for people that, couldn't make this hearing, you're going to get the exact same thing at trial, where they're going to bring it up. They're going to delve into it, except at trial, we're going to hear the actual statements. That'll be the difference. So, but as Diener's going through the reports of the doctor, she's like she starts throwing in this thing where she's kind of questioning, like, is he faking? Like in her own mind, like, she's like, is he feigning this? Is he malingering, or is he psychotic? I don't know. And I mean, that's just her being honest and genuine in her reports. I mean, like, she's trying to, but it's like, the one thing that I don't know that Brad asked her on redirect was whether or not she was ever, I wouldn't say instructed, but whether or not, I forget it. I can't even remember what the hell the question was. But like, at any rate, she's going through these reports, and like, she kind of throws this concept of malingering in there a little bit. So that, that's not great for the defense in terms of like, well, which is it? Does he have a severe mental illness, or do you think that he's like faking it? So, but like, as soon as Brad gets her back on redirect, it's the first thing he asked her, I just want to be clear that, it's your opinion that he had a severe mental illness, and if you had the ability, you would have put him in a mental hospital. And she said yes. So he's got her locked in on that. And like, the other kind of thing that they brought up was that they were saying that like late in March, like around March 21st, that Rick started reading the Bible, that he had never been a religious guy, like on the outside, but that like on or around March 21st that he found God. And this thing with God became like a real intense thing with him, to where, he's saying all kinds of things like, if I well, here I'm jumping ahead to Hirschman. So, but So on May 3rd, in another Awala report, so these are all exhibits she's putting in. This is where he asked for the assistants to call his wife, dials, calls the number, doesn't answer. Didn't have a tablet because it was broken. On the 16th, again, has her try to call, and that's the whole conversation where he comes back and says, I confessed to her and she didn't believe me. 17, again, another call to the wife. And he said that he wants to, again, he's telling her, I want to tell her that I did it, that he confessed to her. And again, she doesn't believe him. He's displaying psychotic symptoms, but they're not significant at this point in time. So like you're getting this kind of like these competing type of issues going on where she's saying he's doing these things and that he's got some psychotic symptoms, but they're not significant. So it's like it's hard to know where he's at. Like I just kept kind of getting the sense that she wasn't 100% on whether or not it was legitimate, which seems crazy to me. It sounds like because I just can't see what the end game is. Like, what is the end game of feigning mental illness? Like, is the concept from the state that he's faking being mentally ill so that he can confess, but he's built in an excuse to say that he didn't mean it because I was crazy? Like, I just don't see like what how that position from the state. Because when the last guy comes on, Harshman comes on, it's like he's like, I talked to like 8 out of 10 guards, all like that I talked to, all said that they thought he was faking. Like all the mental shit was phony. I'm like, to what end? Like, how does that work for him? Like, I don't see how that works for him at all. It like in any way, shape, or form. All right. So basically Walla gets off the stand. And the takeaways are, they had the dude on Haldol, like he was on a tranquilizer. She thought he was suffering from a serious mental illness. Her hands were tied. She couldn't do shit about it. He was stuck. He was stuck where he was at. There was no moving him. And like Brad asked her this one question, he's like, there's malingering tests, right? She said, yeah, there are. And she's like, but we don't have them at our disposal. And Brad like made some kind of comment. He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, that's what the crayons and the pencils are for. Cause that, like, she had said that that's what they have. So like, I mean, they really don't have any way to test his malingering, which I'm hoping, the defense, if knowing what Walla's deposition was, I'm sure that they've hired somebody to deal with that issue about the malingering, whether or not that's like, they have to be able to rebut that, because we know for a fact now, based on what the state was coming at her with by introducing these reports where she's talking about, is he feigning something, that's going to be their position, that he was full of shit, that he's making all the mental illness shit up. Again, I don't get it. Like, maybe somebody in the chat can make that make sense to me. So I don't understand it. Like how that works, how him faking being mentally ill. I guess that's just that they're saying that they're authentic statements and that he was just faking being mentally ill. Like, but from Rick's side of it, that's where it doesn't make sense. Like why? Okay, like again, that thing where, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm crazy as shit. I'm going to make these confessions only so I can turn around and say I didn't mean it because I was crazy as shit. Well, why make the confessions at all if you're not really crazy? Like, I don't know. I'm having a hard time working about it. So the kind of the bombshell witness of the day was the state called as their only witness, Brian Hirschman, Indiana State Police, 30 plus years, 17 years of detective. And he was the guy tasked with listening to all the phone calls, watching all the video, going through all the written reports, going through everything. He's the guy who's the kind of leading the investigation into the Rick Allen confessions. And he made a statement on direct. He's like, well, I've listened to so many hours of Rick Allen that I was creating a pattern of like how he was thinking or where his mind was at during like listening to all these conversations due to the volume, and that's when like Harshman's like, well, like that's when he learns in early March that Rick found God on March 21st. And then he wanted to make sure that when his family went to heaven, that he was going to be able to go to heaven too. He starts kind of getting into it right away. And there was one statement that was interesting that Rick said, where he said like he's not sure what he's done. I'm not sure what I've done, but like in relation to this whole like this God thing, the conversation he was having, he's like I'm not sure what I've done, but whatever it is, I want to make it right so I can get into heaven with my family. And then like right away, kind of in the middle, like in the beginning of the directed day, he says that he comes out and he says that Allen in these statements has talked about the crimes very specifically. So I'm like, oh shit, here we go. I mean, this is always the thing that I've been talking about. So he goes on to testify that there's been 60 plus, and he said that that's conservative, 60 plus direct confessions. That he does include details in one of the confessions that only a person involved in the crimes would know. That's the question from Diener. And his answer was verbatim, I believe that's right. That's what how he answered that. So Diener asked, does he include the details that only a person involved in the crimes would know? And Harshman's answer to that was, I believe that is right. So then she asked questions about, and I'm like, oh shit, like that's, but then again, this is where the timeline comes in, because, and what was he tendered in discovery on the 3rd or the 4th? I mean, if it's things that give Rick Allen factual information about the crime scene, like if he got the discovery and he started going through the discovery, obviously he's going to know the background and the facts of the crime. So it kind of takes the wind out of the sails of that. Like that's what I'm saying. We like I know on its face it's like shocking, but like when you think it out, like you have to consider the fact that if dude, like, and I have no idea what discovery he had. Like he might have had shit that was completely irrelevant and it had like none of the crime scene photos, none of the reports regarding the homicides or how the bodies were found or what happened that day. Like if he didn't get any of that shit and he knows the answers, he's done. I mean, there's no other explanation as how we would know it. If he got that discovery and he had it in his cell and he was reading through it and somehow was able to remember it through his psychoses, or that's the early stages of it. And, that's in his brain. And there's a reasonable explanation why he would know those facts other than him being the killer. But we just don't know those answers yet, which is why we have trial. So then Diener asked about confessions to his wife and his mother, that initially, when listening to these calls, that Kathy and his mother were extremely upset, and they're saying that they're messing with you, they're messing with your mind, and that he senses that both of the women were in disbelief and shock. It then kind of like, as he keeps doing it during different phone calls, like they're always changing the subject. So these are the claims that he makes. Like, again, we don't really hear any specific, we don't hear the actual statements, but these are what he's claiming. He says that and that there exist statements that describe his motivations for the crime, that there's a statement explaining why he delayed in confessing, that there's a statement that he was very concerned about how his family might react when they found out the truth, that he was concerned over whether his family will still love him when they learn the truth. And then he says on November of 2022, like right after he's arrested, he was having a conversation. So this goes back. So they're trying to plug in like a statement that he made pre-psychosis, right? So like he says that he's having a convo with Kathy in November of 2022. And he says, quote, "If this becomes too much for you, let me know and I'll call the detective and tell them everything that they need to know," end quote. That's what he says that Rick said. So that's like the one thing like we get verbatim. And on redirect, or on cross rather, Rosie's like, couldn't that just be him being chivalrous? Like, I'm taking one for the team here type shit. And like Harshman was like, yeah, I guess that could be considered chivalrous. So again, the confessions really kind of take place end of March through end of June, early July. Then they stop. Now he claims that in Wabash in February of this year that somebody reported that Alan was talking to himself and that he apologized for killing Abby. Like, he didn't give much more than that. I don't know where that was. I don't know if that was on a recorded call or, again, somebody overheard him saying it. It sounds kind of like a overhear type situation, log sheet type deal. Again, he said January of this year wanted to tell the truth and be honest, but doesn't want to hurt his family. So he made that statement somewhere. And then, so Diener asks him, like, again, because he's a state actor, so she's just trying to lay it into, like, are any of the statements that you've heard, were they made by way of Alan being coerced? And he's like, no. It's like no one was even asking him questions about it. And like there's a call where he overhears Alan describing like why, the state, that like multiple phone calls, like many phone calls wherein Alan is stating that they're torturing him and that the torture is that it's loud in the prison, that the lights are always on, he's in the cell 23 hours a day. And then he gets into this thing where he talked to 8 out of the 10 guards would all say that they think that Alan's faking it. And we're talking about the door companion guards that are standing outside his door. They think he's faking it. So ultimately so it was kind of bombshelly, like in the sense that like we got more details on like the amount of confessions out there, but there's a shit ton of them. We don't really get the details of them, but like we get details of what they might have in them without actually getting the statements themselves. So I don't know. So Brad then gets up, does the cross, and he just establishes that wait, there might be one other thing here. Oh, so yeah, Brad asks him about the statement that they were seeking to suppress in the other suppression motion, which is, didn't you hear him say that he shot the girls, the 2 girls in the back, which we know isn't true, and that he molested the girls, which isn't true. And like Harshman was like, oh, I don't remember hearing that. don't remember hearing that. So like he didn't admit to hearing that one. And then Brad established that Rick early on was always professing his innocence, and that late he was professing his innocence. So, it's like you've got, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. 3-month period where I'm guilty. Just kind of the fact that all the confessions are confined to this little area of time when like all this shit with his mind is going on has to give you pause. But again, like I honestly don't know. Like if you're having a psychotic break, I mean, are you more inclined to tell the truth, or are you more inclined to make shit up out of whole cloth? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I couldn't tell you. But I don't think that there's like any kind of like clear assumption that can be made on that. Like I think the question becomes, is he more suggestible? Because the one thing that I feel very confident about, like, but they'll never be able to prove in court, is that the guards and the inmates were telling this guy he fucking killed the girls, and he just needs to admit it. Like they were just saying it. Like Walla testified to that too. Like she's like, because whenever she'd be around the either the inmates or the guards that were standing duty, the guard companions, the door companions that were guards, or the companions that were inmates, she's like, they're not supposed to be asking him any questions. They're not supposed to be talking about his case with them at all. Neither one, the guards or the inmates, are forbidden from doing it. And she made the comment, she's like, but we're not there all the time. She's like, I have no idea what they're doing. And she works in a jail. Like you could sense that she was like by the way she was saying it, she was saying that shit goes on all the time. And it just does. It does. Like anybody who doesn't think that guards are trying to squeeze confessions out of guys just don't understand the prison system, because it happens every day in prisons all over the country. It's commonplace. Like them trying to extract information of pretrial detainees, and I'm talking about the government in general, is very much a thing. Believe me. Did that happen here? I don't know. But I wouldn't doubt it. So, and then, so Harshman answers that, yeah, he's confessed his guilt and he's professed his innocence. He's done both. And then, kind of like one of the last things he was saying was that, that Alan, like when he got past the difficult stage with the psychosis thing that was going on, that in his phone calls, he's like, well, they're saying I confessed. And he's like, if I confess, then, just convict me, like as if he doesn't recall confessing, like he doesn't have a recollection of confessing. So I don't know. It was obviously super thought provoking, and pretty interesting. And these confessions are going to be a real problem for the defense. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's going to be a huge issue because, people have a very, very hard time wrapping their mind around the concept that people admit to doing shit that they didn't do. It's facts. People just like, people do not, they don't buy it. Like, because everyone thinks, well, I would never admit to some shit. Like I would never admit to some shit I didn't do. Oh, I mean, you got to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and put them in put yourself in the same boat before you can answer that question. So I don't know. It's going to have to be addressed. And the way that I see this case, like the only way I'm getting the answer, like about Rick Allen and whether or not he's the guy is at trial, is to whether if the state can prove their timeline. If the state can prove the timeline. I had multiple conversations in the past couple days, like asking people, like, what are they basing their timeline on? Like, how are they coming to this time of death? Why is everyone just assuming that's the correct time? I've been saying this for fucking months. Like, somebody, we don't, like, no one knows the evidence that all of us haven't seen, at least that I'm aware of. So, like, I'm curious as to why everyone's just accepting the fact that because they're saying the girls died between 2:30 and 3:30, that's somehow factual. Like, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me, to be honest with you. Like, I don't think that's when they died. And if that's not when they died, I'm sorry, Rick Allen accusers, the case against Rick Allen is for shit. Like, if to me, it seems like that timeline arose from the arrest, to be honest with you. I don't know if they were saying it beforehand, but I don't think so. I mean, I think it kind of reared its ugly head in the PCA. It seems like the timeline was built out of the suspect as opposed to finding a suspect based on the timeline. So, as far as I'm concerned, if the defense wants to try to get to the truth in this case, they need to be working on figuring out whether or not that timeline is full of shit. Like to me, there has to be a civilian searcher out there. There has to be somebody that was out there out of the hundreds of people that were searching. Like, and I'm talking the night before the girls are found, that had to go on Logan's land. Like, there's got to be. You're telling me that no one walked down there and checked that area while they're searching that whole area? I don't know. If I were the defense, that's where I'd be spending all my time, trying to find out every single person that, but like, maybe they're running up against an issue of, like, just, I don't know, like, people not being willing to help, so I don't know. All right, I'm wrapping. It's 2 hours. I'm exhausted. I got some sweet Amanda thank you for the $10 holla. I'm so upset, so angry. I'm terrible at writing. I'm better at talking. I want to know the truth. And I want MS off Court TV. Oh, are they on? Oh God. I don't know who to talk to, and why doesn't a jacket need cameras? I don't know. Thank you for the $10 holla. Ugh. Amanda's back. Basically, with fear I may go. Chicago isn't very far. Taking Defense Diaries and Community, seeking truth, going for a walk. Peace. I'll be back regardless. Thank you. Mistress of Wine, what about the confessions? Dr. Walla testimony. We got to that. Thank you for the $2 holla. Shiraz. From Katie Burr, so grateful you're doing this for us to learn and understand. Thank you endlessly. Thank you for the support. Appreciate it. Under Your Scars, thanks for keeping us posted. Literally a shit show. He's innocent. It's cruelty beyond belief. Hey, from Ontario, Canada. Thank you for that Canadian $5 holla. Appreciate it. MK, new member. Love you. Oh, family hug. Amanda family hug. Michelle, $10 super sticker. Appreciate you. Nay, Bob, I meant to catch up after 1.75 speed, hon. Incredibly appreciative. Thank you so much. I'm equally appreciative of you and your $5 holla. Angel D, $2. Thank you, Bob. You're the bestest. Appreciate you so much. Sally, $20 holla. Thanks for keeping us updated. Appreciate you. Afton, get a good coffee tomorrow. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. All right. My mods, like, I don't know if there were any good questions. I don't know if we had anything that you guys felt like I should have answered. I don't know. But tomorrow's a big day. Like, tomorrow, frankly, is probably the biggest of the days, because it's kind of like either the entire defense's like ability to be able to put on their defense is going to get blown to pieces, in which case they better completely just dig in and trying to destroy that timeline, or it's not. But either way, I suspect we're going to be hearing from a a lot of really interesting witnesses tomorrow. So after court, I'm driving home, so I'm sure I'll go live at some point. I just don't know when it'll be. But all right. So thank you guys. Thank you for hanging so late. I know it is very, very late. It is midnight here and I've got to go to sleep. So thank you so much. Please, if you haven't, share, subscribe, like, do all the YouTube stuff. It means a lot to me. It really helps us build the channel. Love us or hate us, sub us, because, you know, we'll always give you an opinion, and we love opposite opinions. Love it. Love it. Like I've got tons of people that I'm around every day out here that have very opposite opinions of me, and I'm always open to discussion. Always. Like it's just that's how you do dialogue, you know. So all right, you guys are the best in the business. Mods, thank you so much for staying up late with me and guiding me through. And hopefully it wasn't too brutal out here in these streets. I wasn't really looking at the comments. So you guys are the best. Ciao bella.